Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Diana Vasquez. I'm the BERDO Review Board Manager. The BERDO Review Board does not currently have a chair, so I will lead us in a vote for acting chair. Does anyone want to make a nomination for acting chair today?
I nominate Lee Matsueda.
Awesome. Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. Do I have a second for that nomination?
Second.
Awesome. Thank you, Board Member Jacobs. I will now do a roll call vote. How do you vote for the motion to nominate Board Member Matsueda to serve as acting chair? Board Member Boyd?
In favor.
Board Member Ellis?
Aye.
Board Member Jacobs?
In favor.
Board Member Lattimore?
Aye.
Board Member Matsueda?
In favor.
Board Member Nelson?
In favor.
Board Member O'Malley?
Aye.
And Board Member Palmer-Dunning?
In favor.
Great. I will now hand the meeting over to Acting Chair Matsueda.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call this public hearing to order at 4:36 p.m. In accordance with the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance regulations adopted pursuant to the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, Boston City Code Ordinances Section 7-2.2. The BERDO Review Board will hold a virtual public hearing at 4:30 p.m. on November 6th to review the following topics in regards to the reduction of greenhouse gases from the building energy production and consumption so as to promote the public health and welfare of Boston residents. And in accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this public meeting online. To ensure public access to the deliberations of the BERDO Review Board, the public may access the call through telephone and video conferencing. Members of the public, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment. And so to do so, you're going to please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and you can't use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. You can also send your questions to staff via email at BERDO Review Board, altogether, one word, at boston.gov. Yeah, so for the record, I am Lee Matsueda, acting chair of the board, and I will now go ahead and conduct a roll call of board members. Board members, please go ahead and say your name in the order that they appear on the slide.
Rashida Boyd.
Stephen Ellis.
Lavette Jacobs.
Gail Lattimore.
Lee Matsueda.
Jack Nelson.
Matt O'Malley.
Kai Palmer-Dunning.
Excellent. So we're going to go ahead and have our wonderful staff introduce themselves, please.
Diana Vasquez with the Environment Department.
Hannah Payne in the Environment Department.
Nima Mujahid, Environment Department.
Excellent. All right, so you can see here is our agenda for today's meeting. We're going to go ahead and start with the approval of meeting minutes. And then next, the environment staff will review 2023 reported BERDO data. That is emissions data for 2022 that was reported in 2023. This data was publicly shared on Analyze Boston in October, and today's staff is going to go ahead and dig a bit deeper into it with us. And then we'll go ahead and cover some administrative updates and with an adjournment. So first on our agenda is to go ahead and approve our October 23rd meeting minutes. Before we take a motion to approve, just are there any questions or comments regarding the meeting minutes from our board members?
Not a huge one. It's just a minor one.
Please.
I noticed that the only person that did not actually vote in favor of the minutes and had abstained was Kai. So just a minor edit to the minutes.
Thanks, Stephen. Any other comments or questions? Okay. So if not, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Thank you. And so what I guess we'll just do is for all board members that approve the meeting minutes, can you please say aye or just show your hands?
Aye.
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 Are there any board members that abstain? I'm going to abstain. I was not at the last meeting.
Same here.
And are there any opposed? You can say nay. Okay, looks like the ayes have it. Great. We'll go on to our second agenda item here. So this is the update and discussion on the 2023 reported data disclosure. And to be clear again, as I mentioned earlier, this is just the 2022 emissions data that was reported on in 2023. So I'm going to pass it, I think, off to you, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Payne. I'm the Director of Carbon Neutrality in the Environment Department. If I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, nice to meet you. Was out on maternity leave for a while, so getting back up to speed. As Lee mentioned, we are going to just share a really quick update on the reported data from our latest data disclosure for BERDO. So Diana, I think you're controlling the slides. If you can go to the next slide. So as a reminder, an important part of BERDO, of the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, is disclosure. And so a requirement is that we, as the city, publish the data that we collect from building owners annually. And we have recently released the latest reported data. So that is 2022 calendar year that was reported in 2023, and that is now available on Analyze Boston. And I'll just pop the link in the chat to that. This data includes all of the building by BERDO IDs, their energy use, and for the first time, we've also included emissions estimates. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. This data is static as of 9/27. We are working on tools that will update in real time as compliance continues to evolve. We still have people reporting their 2022 data. We still have some people even reporting their 2021 data. So it is a bit of a challenge for us to, get a perfect snapshot of everything that's happening in BERDO. So we are working on a map that would accompany this disclosure and would update in real time, pulling from our reporting platform to show compliance as folks come into compliance over time. But the static data is available now on Analyze Boston, and there's also a data dictionary if there's any confusion or questions about some of the details there. So we just really wanted to highlight some of the key takeaways that we're finding from this, focused on emissions, because again, this is the first time that we're releasing emissions estimates. So I'm actually going to pass it over to Dima, who's going to walk through some of those high-level takeaways.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. I'm Dima, Carbon Neutrality Project Manager in the Environment Department. A large part of my work is helping BERDO building owners, understand their emissions and the compliance mechanisms that are available to them. Next slide, please. Oh, we're already on it. Thank you, Diana. So when we're saying that we're projecting emissions or calculating emissions, what we're doing is taking the data that BERDO building owners have reported to us, and that data is the amount of fuel their building has consumed, and that could be natural gas or electricity or steam, and multiplying it by its respective emissions factor in order to calculate total emissions. Now, you may be wondering, what is an emissions factor? And that is basically a value that represents the amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere, measured in kilograms of carbon dioxide from each unit of fuel or energy that's consumed. In essence, it's describing how dirty or clean a fuel is. Emissions factors for fuels were adopted in phase 2 of the regulations development, and the regulations set emissions factors and methodology for electricity from the grid, district energy systems, natural gas, fuel oil, and other energy sources. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we are estimating building emissions by using the previous year's reported energy data and default emissions factors. What these emissions calculations do not include are any possible renewable energy purchases. We're only using a building's primary use type, meaning we did not calculate a blended emission standard. We also did not group buildings together that will likely apply for a building portfolio, and we did not consider any other flexibility measures. So with that considered, the actual emissions compliance will be different from these estimates. Next slide, please. In addition to calculating emissions for 2022 data, we've also calculated some projections for the first year of emissions compliance, which is 2025. Buildings subject to the 2025 compliance are 35,000 square feet or over if they're commercial buildings, and 35 units or more if they're residential buildings. So approximately 2,600 of the buildings that reported their data in 2023 we're projecting that about 1,400 of them have an emissions limit in 2025. And if nothing changes, about 1,000 of them will remain within their emissions limit without needing to take any additional action in 2025. And approximately 310 will exceed their emissions limits in 2025, about 160 of which could purchase renewable electricity to comply, and about 150 need to purchase renewable energy and take action in their building or apply for a flexibility measure in 2025. And those flexibility measures could be a portfolio, individual compliance schedule, or a hardship compliance plan, depending on the circumstances. Next slide, please. So here's a building type breakdown for the buildings that are not projected to meet their emissions limits in 2025 and need to take action to do so. These are the kind of buildings that we're seeing in our data. First is assembly, and another is university, manufacturing, healthcare, multifamily, and office buildings. I just want to mention again that these insights do not include potential flexibility measures, so these could be different as well. Next slide, please. So I'll conclude my portion of the slides by just mentioning the next steps we have planned out now that we have disclosure and some projections data. The first is we're planning on conducting outreach to building owners with a 2025 emissions limit that will exceed it if they do not take any action. We're planning on sharing their emissions profile, discussing renewable energy options with them, including signing up for Boston Community Choice Electricity Program, as well as discussing incentives for energy efficiency and electrification work. This includes those provided by the Mass Save program, and also sharing flexibility measures that they may be eligible for. We also have a couple of tools coming out for BERDO building owners to get them started. The first is a emissions scorecard, a BERDO emissions scorecard, which will provide owners with an overview of their emissions data, if they're exceeding it or they're within their emissions limits, as well as some tips and resources to get them started. The second tool that we have coming out is a public BERDO emissions calculator. And this will allow building owners and their consultants, if they're using one, to plan for any emission reduction projects, like, for example, equipment upgrades or building efficiency work, and be able to factor that into their emissions compliance for future years. And lastly, we have some grant programs that are going to support zero overtime planning and other actions. And that concludes my slides. I'd like to pass it over to you, Chair.
Great, thanks, Dima, and thanks, Hannah. Excellent. So, yeah, this is a chance now for board members. If you all have any questions or comments that you'd like, we'll kind of go down the list here and we'll circle back if needed. But I'll start off with you, Board Member Boyd.
No, not at this moment. Thank you, Lee. Thank you.
Board Member Ellis.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Slater. First off, I want to applaud the fact that there have been quite a few updates here, especially allowing the data to be visible for the public. And a couple of things on the Excel document that you shared a little while ago, Hannah, that I would hope that we can be able to make some slight edits so that we can have it much more user-friendly, particularly making sure that there's a filter option and other things like ensuring that the first row is frozen. I'm more than happy to talk offline. This is within my background, so I'm more than happy to talk offline about how to make sure that this document is a bit more user-friendly for the general public to be able to utilize. I'm also excited to see the notice about the scorecard as well as the calculator. I think that is going to be an extremely useful tool for our building owners and even for general folks that are curious about what is happening in their properties and so on and so forth. Dima, I would like to go back for one moment because maybe I misunderstood something in your presentation about renewable energy. So I'm going to ask you if you can restate what you were saying earlier about renewable energy and the data set, because I want to make sure that I'm understanding what was said earlier.
Sure. Would that have been in the, when we did, how I said we did not include any possible renewable energy purchases?
Yeah, what did you mean by that?
I just meant that we didn't factor in, like, if a building had tenants that signed up, for example, for Boston Community Choice Electricity, which if they did, you know, there's 3 different plans, so we would have to consider that in their emissions calculations. We also didn't consider any PPAs and power purchase agreements, I'm sorry, and any renewable energy certificates that they may have purchased.
I see. Okay, that's helpful. So I know that in my quick scan of the Excel document that there are quite a few properties that have stated that they have utilized renewable energy. And within Energy Star portfolio managers, building owners also had the opportunity to input what they call green power in Energy Star portfolio manager, which could essentially either, I don't like to use the term offset usually because it can get confusing, but it can essentially offset the total emissions associated with electricity. So is the data accurately reflecting an owner or an organization's reporting of green power as it stands today inside of this larger data set?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So you are correct that there is that is reported, and we do have some data on that. When we were just doing this analysis, because we were trying to just do kind of really high level of getting a sense of who might be looking for flexibility measures and relief from the review board, we weren't going into that level of detail just for this first pass. We will certainly be taking a closer look at that as we meet with building owners or as we get closer to actually like evaluating actual compliance. The other piece that one of the reasons why we weren't looking at it is we know that it is not always reported consistently. And it's something we are working on updating how we're collecting that data. And so we didn't want to, make any assumptions that it was fully reported there because someone might report on-site renewable electricity, and that's really easy to see from portfolio manager and included. But for example, they might not have reported their renewable energy certificates that they've purchased through portfolio manager. And so we just wanted to take kind of most basic look at this. So we didn't look at renewable energy. So hopefully, there will be some building owners that, show that they might not be reaching a 2025 limit, but they actually are already purchasing renewables and doing a lot of this stuff. So they're in pretty good shape. But this is giving us just that back of the envelope estimate.
Thank you, Hannah. That's great to know, and I appreciate that explanation. One final question I have, just out of curiosity, because I know essentially the way the reporting form is set up right now is that it allows for the option to report on your renewable energy certificates, which I believe is what you're alluding to. At what point during the regulation process will we be talking about that option switching to what's the word I'm looking for? Required, so to speak.
That is a great question. Definitely will be required for 2025 data, if not sooner. But updates to the reporting we're not including in the regulations update because most of that is from like administrative guidance that we put out of like what is in the BERDO reporting form and things like that. We are taking a close look at the BERDO reporting form this year and are hoping to make some changes to it for this upcoming reporting year to test out some of those changes so that we're making sure we're getting the right information from folks that then we can do like really make sure we are getting information reported in a way that allows us to be confident in the emissions calculations for compliance.
Okay.
So would welcome feedback on that from you, Stephen, because I know you've done a lot of this, but others on the board as well.
All right. Happy to chat about that. I swear I say every time, Diana and I will chat, and I have yet to get on a call with Diana. So I'm going to actually send an email right now so that we can actually talk about this. So I appreciate it. Thank you. That is all my questions for right now.
Great. Thanks, staff. Thanks, Board Member Ellis. Board Member Jacobs.
So I don't really have, well, I had a question earlier, but I'm glad that obviously that's why we wait for the questions until the end of the presentation. I just wanted to say that I'm really looking forward to seeing how the calculator is going to come into play, because my question was more so along the lines of how are the homeowners and the property owners, they're going to be able to, I guess, pretty much authenticate their the accuracy of it. But I'm assuming with that calculator, it'll be able to help with them being able to predict their projections and on our end as well. So that's the only comment I had.
Great. Thanks, Board Member Jacobs. I think we're going to go right to Board Member Lattimore.
Thank you. I just wondered if the staff could point me to the timelines for meeting the certain standards, because I heard in this presentation a 2025 emission standard. And for some reason, I'm sure I got it wrong. I always thought it was a 2030, but are there kind of interim steps? And is there a chart that we can use to kind of track this? Because that would just help me. I'm always thinking it's a little further out than it is.
Sure. And I don't know that we have a chart somewhere, so I'm sure someone we can find one to share with you from a previous slide deck, but we don't have one here, so apologies for that. So there are 2 dates that the emissions standards kick in. The first one is 2025, and that is for buildings that are 35,000 square feet or above. For everything that's non-residential, and for residential buildings that is 35 units and above, they have to start meeting the emission standard in 2025. For the smaller buildings, so those that are 20,000 square feet to just under 35,000 square feet, or 15 units to 34 units, they don't have to meet the emission standard until 2030, but they have to meet the same emission standard as everyone else that hits in 2030. So it's really behooves everyone, whether you have to get started, your first year of compliance is 2025 or 2030, to start planning ahead, because the 2030 emission standard can be quite a jump down for folks in terms of emissions.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Board Member Lattimore. I had sort of 2 areas just to questions about. I'm thinking about sort of the buildings. I know we have a little bit of time, but thinking about the buildings that haven't reported, and just trying to remember, like, how many are we talking? And just can you just share again, are there specific things that the staff needs, either from the board or just in general, to make sure you're reaching these other building owners, to make sure they're also reporting? That's the first thing.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So there are several thousand that are still have not reported. There are a few categories to that, of like large building owners that fall into that. So one being Boston Housing Authority, that is continuing to have some challenges with their data from the utilities and is working diligently to get their buildings reported. And I forget off the top of my head how many BERDO IDs they have, but it's several hundred. So that is one piece. And then also we reported BERDO IDs for state and federal buildings, but not all of them are reporting at this time. The rest that are like we're really trying to reach are the ones that, have not yet engaged with us at all. There are some that are still in process, but folks who just have not yet done really anything on BERDO and aren't a large property owner. We are working on some strategies to try to reach those folks. We're going through a ton of returned mail right now as a fun activity to try to track that. So I think I can continue to think about, ways we might lean on all of you for help with that outreach. I think what we're planning is going to be a lot of like tedious staff time. I'm happy to report we have a second BERDO assistant who will be starting in a couple weeks, and a big focus of those BERDO assistants is going to be trying to track down building owners. So we have not yet found the silver bullet to that, but more to come, and happy to come back and report on progress on that in the future.
Thanks, Hannah. The second area, I guess, is, I guess it's exciting to, and we've said this before, I think the board, but exciting to hear that there are additional staff members, because yeah, there's a lot of different pieces here. I was wondering if you all might just walk me through a little bit about the outreach that happens. You were talking about the next steps, right? Outreach to building owners. Kind of who does that? Is there one person on staff that kind of leads that effort? Is there a team? Just curious to know a little bit about who does that. And yeah.
Sure. Dima, do you want to jump in with, since I think you're going to be doing a bit of the initial outreach?
Sure. Yes. So I will be, starting the outreach effort. As we mentioned before, there's about 300 buildings or so. The first step is obviously to categorize the path forward for these buildings in terms of compliance. The scorecards will be out by then, and we'll be able to sort of reach out to all of these building owners in mass, since we have their contact information in their building reports, in their data reports, I'm sorry. And hopefully a few more members of the team will be able to also spearhead that effort. Hannah will be on the team. And we're also working with the BCCE team to conduct a mass outreach effort for signups on that front.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to
so that's right. And I would just add that some of the folks who will be reaching out to, who are on that list of, needing to take action by 2025, are quite sophisticated building owners who likely already know this, have dedicated teams of folks, energy teams. We are happy to meet with them, but they might, not need as much assistance as the single building owner who, is still kind of wrapping their head around emissions compliance. So I think our focus is really going to be on, setting up one-on-one meetings with those folks who this is really new for, and walking them through what this means and what their different options are. So there will be a bit of that as well, of kind of, I'm hoping we don't have to have 300 separate meetings.
Fantastic. This last comment, and then yeah, I think similar to maybe what Board Member Ellis was saying, it's really good to have the projections too. I appreciate that. It's been interesting. It's interesting to see the number right around how many we might expect in terms of the applications, because I think that was a big question mark. We just had no idea. And I know this is an estimate, but interesting to see that number and is helpful. So thank you for all the work you all are doing. I will pass it on to Board Member Nelson.
Thank you. So I'm glad you went to this slide. Approximately 1,400 have an emissions limit in 2025, meaning they do not meet the requirement, correct?
No. So of the 2,600 that I've reported, 1,400 are in that larger building threshold. So they're 35,000 square feet or above, or 35 units or above. The remaining 1,200 are smaller buildings that don't have to comply until 2030. So we didn't look at those for this kind of initial focus.
Okay, so then the percentage of compliance is 400 divided by 1,400, approximately?
Like around 300. There are a number of buildings that the reason it doesn't add up perfectly, and I appreciate doing the math so we can talk about this. There were a number of buildings around like 50 or 60, I think, Dima, that have
like 90.
Okay, maybe more 90, where we didn't have in the data that we were pulling, and it could live somewhere else. We were not able to be able to project what their emissions limit would be. And so the reasons for that would be they put in their building use type in Portfolio Manager as like other, which doesn't have a corresponding emission standard. Most of these buildings have an appropriate Portfolio Manager building use type that should be put in. So it just requires a little bit more work. So that's the biggest one. Some of them didn't have square footage pulling through. So there are a few things like this is our first pass at the data. There's a lot of cleanup that needs to happen, but those are some of the reasons why the numbers don't add up.
Okay, so it's about 20% non-compliant then, approximately. 300 divided by 1,400. And how many buildings have not reported?
So that is, I think we have around, Dima, I don't know if you have this number handy, but it's like over 5,000 that are total that need to report. So it's about 50%, but if we take into account, if we take BHA off that list and the state and federal properties off that list, it gets much smaller. And then if we're looking at square footage, most of the buildings that have not yet reported are those smaller buildings. So we expect most of them will have a 2030 emissions limit. So definitely this is an underestimate of who will need to take action.
Okay. And then lastly, when will the scorecards be sent?
So we are working on getting the final version of that. I'll say before the end of the year, but hopefully sooner than that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Board Member Nelson. Board Member O'Malley.
Yes, thank you all. And actually, if you would mind keeping it on that slide, I want to follow up. I echo, first of all, great work, everybody. That goes without saying. I think this is so interesting because it really puts focus on what we need to be working on. So to suggest that 20% of buildings might need to take action, I think is a very, very good thing, because I think the flip side of that is 80% don't. And I know there's been a lot of concern from folks that are unsure of it. Having said that, that number is a little bit fungible, since we do have so many outstanding buildings that haven't reported. But to your point, Hannah, many of those wouldn't hit the threshold of square footage to have to make changes in the next year. I'm curious, there was a slide where you talked about community choice energy, and I assume your work with the BCEC is going to continue to try to grow the number of folks who opt up to 100%, which is, they have done yeoman's work, and they've also proven that you're going to save money if you opt up to 100% as opposed to opting out. That's been a trend that we've seen continuing. So of those, essentially half of the 300, the 160 could make some purchases or opt to 100% renewable with community choice energy. We don't know that they are yet. Some may be, some may not be. I think a subsequent slide said that they hadn't been to that level yet. That's correct, right? Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
And what, I know you can only do it once a year. Isn't it February that you can change your rate?
So it's my understanding that you can opt up whenever into the 100%, and you can also leave the program whenever, but we can get a confirmation on that. But I don't think it's not a specific time. And also, if you move, you can re-enroll in the program with your new account.
That's great to hear. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That answers my question if we needed to get a little more active. But if it's a sort of a rolling option, that's changed, because I know initially there was a very short. It was like getting on your health insurance plan. You could only do it during a certain enrollment period. So it's good to hear this flexibility now. That is all for this round. Again, great work. I guess just, is City Hall one of those 150 subset of the 310 of the 1400? Do we know?
Dima, was that one on your list? I'm pretty sure it is not doing great.
Yes, it was on our list, but
yeah,
that's Chris Kramer's dragon.
No, and listen, I'm not a lawyer, but I know to ask questions, you know the answer to. So I assumed it would be, and I'm not picking on City Hall. I love City Hall both aesthetically and, more importantly, people inside. But clearly, is a great opportunity for us to swing for the fences as it relates to making sure that City Hall is not only BERDO compliant for 2025, but far beyond that. So look forward to continuing the good work and good partnership and leadership of our mayor. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Board Member O'Malley. And for this round, we'll close out with Board Member Palmer Dunning.
Great, thank you. Yeah, this is great. It's really good to kind of see the estimate data for the board buildings that have reported. Yeah, I agree with Ellis, Board Member Ellis and others that it's really encouraging to see the scorecard for building owners and the emissions calculator for the public. For the scorecard, I know that when buildings report, they have to show their building EUI and Energy Star rating. Do you know what metric will be used for the scorecard?
Yes, it will be projecting emissions in kilograms of carbon dioxide.
Okay, cool.
And we'll kind of talk about their emissions limit with BERDO. So that will be the main thing, the main focus of the scorecard.
Great. That's all my questions.
Chair, if I may go back to a question that Board Member Ellis asked about being able to filter the data, I noticed that there is a sneaky download button that's hard to see on that website. So if you are, it's blue and it's towards the top, but you can download that, and that should give you a full Excel version that allows you to do more with the data than is allowable on the embedded version. So just wanted to flag that for folks.
Great, thanks, Anna. Particularly for board members who haven't had a chance to chime in, are there any other questions or comments you all want to make before we move on to the public comment period? Okay, hearing none. We are going to now open the meeting to public comment. So As a reminder to members of the public, welcome, and to provide public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and you cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. You can send your questions to staff via email at BERDO@boston.gov. Let's try to keep our questions to 3 minutes if we can. And we'd like to ask, members of the public to please introduce yourself and if you can, your neighborhood or organization. So now we're going to give the public a chance to provide any questions or comments. Okay. Please speak up, or you can write your stuff in the chat too if you prefer. But obviously, we would love to hear from any of you that have called in and joined us, members of the public. We'd love to make sure we get your voice in here. Okay. All right, we have a quiet group today. Okay, that's fine. But obviously, any things pop up, you can send that email as the meeting continues right in the chat, obviously, and we will have other public meetings as well open to you all. So any other further discussion or questions from the board or the public? And if not, we will move on to our third agenda item. Yeah, board member Ellis, I see your hand.
So Hannah, I just wanted to ask you about some of your data cleaning process and how the city plans on taking on that. Particularly, I find it fascinating. Forgive me, I live in the world of data, so you get an other category and how you intend to sort of deal with that. So I just wanted to hear what's your process so far.
So thank you for the question. I am still trying to sort out what our process is going to be, if I can be honest. So a few of them for that, we need to go through and do some quick assessment on those that have that kind of seemingly incorrect property use type. Many of them, it's obvious that they're just that there is something that they should be selecting as their primary use. For example, I think I've seen a number of commercial buildings come through as other that just happen to have multiple uses. So maybe they'll have office and restaurants and they didn't break that out in the way that they should have. So there's some due diligence that we need to follow up on with those building owners to make sure that they're breaking down their building in the appropriate way, or just choosing to report their primary use type. So again, that can be if your building is mostly an office building and has a bunch of other stuff going on, you can report it as just office. Similarly, if it's mostly residential but has ground floor retail or a community center, it can be reported as just residential, or you can choose to break it down if there's 10% or more of those other uses. So in some cases, there's an obvious answer, and in some others, I think we'll have to work with those building owners to figure out what the best way to report that is. It is a lot that we are trying to figure out what, of the data that got reported, where do we need to make improvements in our reporting process, our instructions, our verification process to make sure that we're getting all of the data in a way that is clean enough for us to then project these emissions and compare against emission standards. We are continuing to work through ways to improve that, to get that data where we need it to be.
Thank you for that. So it sounds like a department-wide effort. My main reason for the questioning is, now that you're bringing on someone else to help with more with outreach, I'm concerned about who else is going to be able to assist with all of the data while you're also developing regulations and so on and so forth. So I appreciate your response.
Great. I did have one other just question, I guess. So we're having this meeting. It is a public meeting. But I guess at what point does this information also get shared with like others in city government or even the public at large? Like, how does this, beyond the website, are there other ways of getting out information about, hey, we got this last round of data in, this is what it's telling us, some key takeaways like you all shared. Are there any other ways that you all kind of work to get that information out, also along with the notice that there are building owners that we're still trying to reach?
We have not planned other kind of outreach or promotion on the disclosure. I think when we will definitely like do a BERDO newsletter update when we have that map that I mentioned that has that more real-time interaction, because I think that is a little bit more user-friendly and gives information that we've heard folks are looking for of, I want to see if this building's in compliance, or I want to check that, my building, like I've updated it and I want to see that change is reflected, that kind of thing. But I'd be open to hear if you or the other board members have ideas on where we should be sharing this out. I'm not always sure that folks are that interested in this, but maybe they are.
You may be right, Anna. And I'm just thinking of it because it does feel maybe a bit premature, but there's been a lot of progress here. We're starting to get a better sense, and perhaps it's in the new year, right? Or in 2024 where there is something. But I guess I'll keep thinking about that. I'm just it does feel important to kind of keep bringing it back to the broader public in different ways, it feels like, and maybe this is not the right moment, but I was just thinking aloud there.
Great, and definitely welcome other ideas of things that you think would be worth us trying to share out more about BERDO or get the word out on. We have a communications team in our department that we work with closely, so that's, if there are things that you think are worth elevating, would be very welcome to hearing those suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be interesting. Again, maybe it's the new year to like hear from some of the communications team at some point about what's kind of lined up. But again, I trust them. I think that's their job, right? So, but it would be maybe interesting to hear from that team at a certain point. So, again, great work, team. Thank you all so much. Any just last questions or comments here? And if not, we're going to go on to our next agenda item. Okay. So yeah, we're going to get to the third agenda item. And as you can see, it is our administrative updates. So I'm going to pass it to, oh wait, Kai, do you have something?
Oh yeah, sorry. I was having trouble finding my raise hand button. Yeah, I was just want to quick comment. So I think in terms of, to your point about kind of communicating with the public, a lot of building owners, specifically talking about the scorecard, a lot of building owners use like lead placards as kind of a great marketing strategy for their building and their what they're doing around energy efficiency and energy reduction. So I think finding a way to allow building owners to use their emission scorecard and display it publicly or share it publicly in a way that kind of brings awareness to BERDO and to the performance of the building, I think would be a really great way to engage the public.
I like that idea. Great, thanks, Board Member Palmer-Donnan. Board Member Lattimore?
Yeah, just getting back to the issue of how we are communicating with people and the folks that have not, been reporting or keeping up with compliance issues. Just wondered if the city has a sense of how many of those folks and it's maybe difficult to tell. I'm just concerned particularly about, members of the BIPOC community who, might, be challenged, who own properties that are of a significant size. And just, wondering, I know that you talked about different strategies, but just wondering if you have any sense of, I don't know how you tell this, but, maybe it's not necessarily just based on the inner city neighborhoods of Boston, could be, but that probably is where most of those owners are. But I just wondered if there's any sense of that, because from an equity perspective, trying to be as supportive of those building owners as in particular, I'm really curious about strategies to reach them. And maybe that's part of what you're saying about how those of us may be helpful to, if we know folks, but just wondering if there's any consideration around that particular population, identifying it and supporting that population.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Gail. So in this first kind of pass at the data of what kinds of buildings are likely needing to take action by 2025, we're seeing buildings that use a lot of energy and are bigger, and those tend to be not the like single building owner, or they're not necessarily surprises. We've got some of our universities on there, large hospitals, museums, that will need to, they're kind of the biggest emitters and biggest energy users. So in many ways, we looked at the data and we weren't really surprised by the list of kind of the types of buildings that we saw that need to take action. As we get kind of beyond that first pass of like who needs to kind of really get on immediately in terms of planning for 2025, that's when I think we really want to take a closer look at who those building owners are, how we're supporting them. And we do know there are a number of BIPOC building owners who've had trouble even with reporting. So we know some of those are in that group of who is not reporting. And then also that they'll need much more support in making those plans for decarbonization. We talk to folks often who are, the volunteer coordinator for their church, and their church is a BERDO building. And they are trying their best to report, but it's pretty complicated, right? So we have that level of BERDO building owner and, a large commercial real estate owner that has, millions of square feet in Boston. And that is something that we want to be making sure that we are supporting the smaller guys in navigating all of this. And we're working on a few things that we are hoping to be able to help those folks with reporting specifically. So first, just getting them into BERDO, reported their data kind of with the basics so that they can take that on going forward. Hoping to have an update on that in the next couple of months in terms of how we're supporting those folks with reporting. But this will continue as we look at emissions compliance. And that's one of the, I think, great things about BERDO is, we've built in the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. That's going to be a way that can go back to folks who, need some additional help in meeting their emissions compliance, and also conserve community benefits. So that was a bit of a rambling answer, but
I think that was really
some
helpful.
of my thoughts.
No, thank you. That was helpful. I definitely am personally interested, and I'd imagine a number of us on the review board, as well as the general public, are interested in kind of supporting that, particularly, not that others aren't important, but the BIPOC commercial and churches and others. And, so supporting the city and generating ideas of how, and helping with making contact as we can. I think that's really important to keep on the screen and continue to have discussion with the review board as well as the general public, about that, about those strategies. Really important from my perspective.
Great. All right. Any last comments or questions before we move on? Okay. Okay, now Diana, we're going to pass it to you for the administrative updates.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the very good, robust question and discussion section. I'll quickly review some administrative updates. So quickly on the regulations process, we are currently in a comment period that will close this Thursday because Friday is a holiday. And the BERDO team will work diligently to revise those regulations to present them to the Air Pollution Control Commission on the following Wednesday, November 15th. That I believe that hearing will be at 2:30 on Wednesday. So the comment period is for preliminary proposals on fines and enforcement and draft policy language on hardship compliance plans. And the BERDO team will present revisions on or will present first draft on fines and enforcement and revisions for hardship compliance and the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund to the EPCC on Wednesday. So that's the first update. Second update, I did want to share with the review board that we are now migrating application forms for building portfolios and individual compliance schedules to an online platform. So ideally, building owners will be able to use a website and not have to use paper application forms, which was almost a scary thought for a second. But we do have an online platform, so that's coming soon. And for review board members, I wanted to mention I sneakily added a 2024 tentative schedule for public hearings in our November 6th folder. I just wanted to put on your radar. We can discuss in the future. There are a couple meeting dates that fall on a holiday, so we may need to figure out if we want to postpone those meetings or push them a week. But I just put a first pass in the folder for you all to look at. And then I also added some timelines and some key deadlines because I know we've talked in the past that it would be helpful to see a visual. Again, these are just the first pass, but just wanted to flag them for you all. And then lastly, our next tentative schedule, our next meeting is scheduled for November 20th, so 2 weeks from now.
Great, thanks for all that, Diana. Just any quick questions or comments about all that, and then I think we will move to adjourn. Okay. Well, once again, thanks staff, thanks board, thanks member of the public, everyone. We are going to go ahead and I'm going to ask if there is a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
O'Malley, thank you for the second. All those board members in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Any board members opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned at 5:33 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good week, everybody.